framework which we posit as science consistent. We're not trying to prove the aspects of Vedic statements. Rather, what we're saying is that there are insights contained within many of the statements of the Upanishads, of Vedanta, of the text on Sankhya, and the Yoga Sutras. And to show how we can borrow on those as needed in order to elucidate many of the conundra that face modern science. So it's a different approach, perhaps, than some others who are working in this field have taken. We've been developing this for some years, and as I say, all we can do is give you a flavour of the work. The idea is that the Atma paradigm looks at some of the big questions: consciousness, matter, life, and the universe. Now, typically, the order that is given to this in the standard model is that first matter appears, then the universe takes shape, and then on some little rock, life develops. And when it crawls out of the sea, it develops consciousness. That's usually the order that it goes. Our order is different. From the analysis that we gave yesterday, and I'm not going to repeat it, but we believe that there is strong evidence to suggest that consciousness cannot be reduced to physical systems and properties. Rather, you have to regard it as a fundamental property. There is good suspicion, good rationale for taking that approach. And we want to embrace that approach and really see where we can go on that. So we start with the point that consciousness is the primary reality. Now, if that's the case, what then? We will show in this example how from there, really you have to then redefine matter. And once you understand what physical matter is in relationship to consciousness, then the combination of consciousness and matter produces that sort of thing we call life. Now, then we posit that actually the universe may be a response to the need for accommodating life. So our process, we will go consciousness, matter, life, the universe. I'm suggesting that I've already covered consciousness to a degree, but there's a couple of aspects that I want to develop and show you how the interaction between consciousness and matter, something which we didn't get to explore yesterday. So that is our order: consciousness, matter, reality, life, the universe. And what we're suggesting is that this thing we call reality is like a continuum. We're avoiding, or at least putting aside for now, the issue of substance and ontology. We're looking at functions and properties. So what we posit in this continuum, there is one part of that continuum which exhibits the properties we assign to physical matter. And in another part of this continuum, there are the properties, the properties that we assign to consciousness. And we're suggesting that consciousness is the observer and experiencer of the information contained within physical properties. That defines the interrelationship that exists between consciousness and matter. It's not such a big dichotomy. Matter is information and energy, and consciousness is energy which observes information. That is its basic relationship. So there is this natural connection between the two. So this particular slideshow seems to want to go through every little element of the thing before it comes on. So, in order to facilitate that, we have to posit the existence of some kind of interface functions. And this is, we heard from Stuart Hammeroff the other day that we can't think of a computer and the brain and consciousness, or we can't think of consciousness as something that can be computable, but actually the example of how a computer works is reasonably interesting for our relationship with it. The computer can process data internally. It doesn't require a screen, but all computers come with a screen. Why? Because there is something that is not the computer that wants to know what is going on inside the computer. So for the computer to communicate its data with something that is not itself, it requires an interface system. And what we're suggesting is that that also exists between consciousness and the physical systems of the body and the brain. There needs to be an interface system, something that can decode the data, the neural data of the brain, and present it as qualia for the experience of consciousness. Now, before we get to, we'll come to that interface functions more in a moment. That aspect that we call physical matter, I'm now going to analyze it using some of the concepts that we have in the Sankhya philosophy. And we're going to keep it as simple as we can, but we want to identify the particular role of the Akash, sometimes described as space, sometimes it's considered to be somewhat equivalent to space-time as discussed, but I'm not saying they're exact, but there are certain overlapping and interrelated functions. And within that area of the physical matter, we have to acknowledge there is a state of subtle information, proto-physical information, that which defines the manifestation of the physical properties. So this is something we've heard a fair bit. We heard it from Stuart, we heard it from Brenda and others yesterday. That physical matter is energy which contains information. So what is that subtle information that is specifying the forms, the behavior of physical matter? In Sankhya terms, we call that the Tan matras. And I want to show you how that works. Think of physical matter as a field. Okay, it's not really showing there's grid lines, the 5x5 grid, which is not showing up very well in this light. But there at least we've got its grid point references. Okay? And when the data is 0, 0, 0, 0, nothing is manifest. But if we change the underlying data in a field, when I say the data, I'm talking to its grid values. And we're just using a simple scalar value at the moment. So when we change the data values, then what happens? That data, those scalar values become inhered within the different grid points. So that's my A lot. That's A1, A2, A3, A4, etc. B1, B2, B3. Just data. But now when that information enters the field, this is what happens. It starts to manifest something in that field. And that then allows a three-dimensional template to form, which, when we take it further, produces a three-dimensional form that is the only observable aspect of that field. Now, this is just a kind of simple analogy to indicate how the role of subtle proto-physical information can manifest and affect the appearance of physical stuff. So, we mentioned the special role of the Akash because we want to acknowledge the special role of Shabda as the prime and first of the Tan Matra forms of information. We won't go in more detail on that. Now, what is really happening in perception? And yesterday I explained that there was not only problems identifying how the brain could come up with qualia, but actually I showed that it is deficient even in the simple data needed for basic forms of perception. So, is there a mechanism that we can show that can account for both those things? And what we're suggesting is that the information that you saw in the field that manifests physical matters can also be reduced back to the data. That is then gathered in Shabda, and it is the interaction of the cognitive elements of the interface which gather that data and process it and utilize it to generate qualia, which is then, so these are the different functions. Reading the Shabda data within the information field, processing that as mental content, generating it as qualia for the experience of consciousness. So it's not a detail that we need to look into now, but it's important to note that even these cognitive functions can be broken down. There are sub-functions recognized within Sankhya. And you see them here. The ahankar, which actually represents persona, or the pseudo-self, the pseudo-ego. Buddhi, which is the discriminating intelligence. And mana, which is the mental pool. The Yoga Sutras provides an incredible detail of how these different functions work and how they interact with the material and the physical elements. So what we're suggesting is that perception involves the combination of data gathered from the physical world. There is neural data, but that's actually deficient in information. That data is taken by mana, but it also has to be coupled with other Shabda data present within the Akash to join it together in order to get the image-enhancing effect that we experience at every moment of our lives. So that model actually addresses the sparseness of sensory perception. Now, is it testable? Yes. We heard yesterday about PRP, precognitive remote perception. I have training in remote viewing through the Stanford system, and I run workshops on remote viewing demonstrating how it is possible to, with your mind alone, to access Akashic information and bring that back and report it. And we have done some clinical type experiments to show that the results from first-time viewers will beat chance by some significant amount. Maybe one day we get to run a remote viewing workshop together. It'd be great fun. It really is fun. They put these guys through it. Now I have to move on to them very quickly. I raised yesterday a point, and all I had to do, or the only time I had yesterday, was to make the suggestion. Consciousness doesn't just perceive stuff. Consciousness is also a source of volition. Will. Will doesn't mean that you can control everything, doesn't make you omnipotent. It just means you wish to vary the content of your experience. And so if perception is the route of information passing from this area up to here, volition is passing back down the other way. So, when the will is expressed by consciousness and converted through the cognitive processes as intent, converted into desires, ideas, strategies, and then encoded in Shabda, which then inheres on the Akash, which then sets up a series of evolutes through the other Tanmatras and manifests as the full physicality. Then, when it interacts with the brain, it's a full, I don't know if there's a big moment on this. No, I haven't got a big on this. It manifests as neural activity. But it can also manifest as a physical change. And it really happens according to the system that we talked about earlier, that if you change the underlying information, you're going to change the physical structure that is generated in that field. You don't have to change the physicality, you change the underlying data. That's how the volition of the Atma interacts with the physicality of the world. So I want to just give you an idea of this and discuss specification. In Britain, I don't know if you have it over here, we have a program called Countdown. And the fun game, my mother was a great fan of this. You get 9 letters, and you've got to find the longest word you can in that. Okay, so you've got 10 seconds to do that. I'll have a little drink of water. All right, you're coming up with something? All right, quickly shout them out, the words you've got.
Rabies.
Yes, that's right.
What was that?
Sad.
Yeah? Actually, I want each of you to have a word in your mind. Okay? You've each got your own word. Okay? Right? Now, there's one. Brains. Anyone got brains? Anyone got a longer word than brains?
Yeah.
Bread. Bread.
Longer than brains?
Bread. Oh, it's the same.
Okay, that's it.
Sardine.
Sardine, well done. Thank you very much. Okay, now here's what's actually happening. We have potential collapsing into something specific. And what has changed the potential and produced the specific? What we're suggesting is the expression of will, when interpreted by the mind as intent, acts on that potentiality, collapses it, utilizes certain aspects of it, rearranges it, applies additional information, and that's what we call specification. And then that adds the additional information, which then collapses into the specific word. Now here's a quick question. Which is more important, the potential or the specific? Huh?
Potential.
We can argue over that forever, can't we? Is there a right? Here's what I'd like you to think. The potential is more important to us as a group because it gives each of us the chance to act on that. But the specific is dear and more important to us as individuals. It's what I have made out of that potential. Okay? And I put it to you, that is the secret of understanding the jiva's interaction with the material world. The material world presents itself as potential states and allows the will of the Atma to interact with those potential states in order to manifest the specificity that you wish to enjoy for yourself. And what we're going to now explore, is just how some of those things affect physics, biology, and even astrophysics. This is the pair mechanical cascade that they use. We mentioned those yesterday, the experiments both on quantum random event generators and on mechanical systems that demonstrate how intent affects physical output. I'm going to show you another one. The rice experiment. It was raised yesterday. Someone asked about the water effect, the gunas and the water. The person in the room who did that? No. Huh? It was you. I thought it was. Yes. Here's an experiment that you can do. It's part of the Japanese professor's experiment. You get some rice and you put you get some rice. You put in identical amounts in 2 containers. One is labelled thanks, one is labelled full. With the thanks one, you pick it up, and morning and evening for about a minute you say, thank you, you're wonderful, nourishing food, you're a gift of nature, you make my family healthy, I love the taste, and you're absolutely fantastic. The same rice, but in a different container marked full, you go, you idiot, you're useless, you're nasty, disgusting, yucky. You really give it to it. Then, put them on the shelf, see what happens. That's after 9 months. Which do you think is the fool? Which do you think is the one that's been praised? Thanks? Fool. 18 months. The rice of the one that was thanked, is still in good shape. I'm not suggesting you eat it, but this has turned to a nasty liquor. 4 years, the rice is still in shape. I've got them still in my kitchen shelf. 6 years. I moved them around because I want to make sure that they always, I've randomized everything along the way. I've done this completely scientifically. Do it for yourself. Prove your own power of intention. And what I believe is happening here is that by the nastiness that I was injecting here on the fool is invoking Tamagun that Mauricio was talking about yesterday. Whereas when I invoke Sattva, I am nourishing it, I am preserving it, I'm protecting it. Whereas the opposite will deplete it. So, now I'm going to hand over, now that you're convinced of how intent, manifesting as the psychological drivers in an organism can affect things, I hand you over to Dr. Ryan Bissett. And I apologize, we seem to be rushing. We can so much for that.
It looks easy to use. Let's see. Okay, so that's forward, and that's the pointer. Great. Okay, good afternoon. So I'm going to carry on from where Martin left off. I'm going to talk about biology and living systems. Specifically, I want to get on to the point of information and life, but that will come a little bit later. So let's start with the obvious question, shall we? What is an organism? Now, it seems like we've obviously answered it, right? Everyone knows what life is, everyone knows what an organism is. You just look around and, you're a lot of organisms, I can see you here. But actually, from a philosophy of biology standpoint, it's actually a very difficult question to answer, and we'll get into that now. So we've got our subject here. It's our man in the lab coat, and you can see that he's an organism. He's got a kind of barrier around him. He's not kind of just... If he didn't have a barrier, you wouldn't know where he begins and where he ends. So that's kind of the way we define an organism, that you can kind of see it's got a shape. So it looks like a closed system. But if we take it a step further, we can see that everyone is affected and affects the ecosystem in which they inhabit. So in a sense, organisms are open systems. We're kind of receiving information from the environment, and as Martin said, we're using our volition, beavers build dams kind of thing. So I want to take you through the different levels of an organism. It might seem very obvious, but I think it's very important to start there so we can define it properly. I'm taking the example of the circulatory system. So here you can see the system of the blood, you can see organs in there and all that kind of stuff. And then we move to the heart. So that's an organ that pumps blood around the body. And then from organs we get to tissues. Now tissues are kind of either one cell type or multiple cell types that come together to do a useful function. For example, blood vessels. Then we get to the cell. Now I've made it bigger because it's so complicated. A single cell is it's like a little factory. It's hard to really describe it in any other way apart from that, and I'll get into that in a bit more detail. If you go a bit further down, we get to molecules. This is the biochemistry, molecules such as DNA, RNA, proteins. Here we've got a biphospholipid layer, which is what surrounds our cell, and a protein running through. So the protein can interact with stuff on the inside and the outside of the cell. The next bit is completely out of my pay grade. It's physics, and so we've got atoms and below. So the question is, what is life and what controls life? What causes life? Okay, I just highlighted this here to make the point that biologists agreed that single cells are the kind of unit of life. So we can talk about molecules, but it's actually the cell which is the unit of life. And sometimes you get them as a single one, like a bacteria or a virus. Other times you get them as, like us, multicellular organisms, starting from an egg and a sperm that fuse to form a single cell, which then somehow grows and specializes into an organism with many different organs and things we've just described. I wanted to show you the cell, the basic unit of life, from another standpoint. We've got all the organelles inside the cell, which I just showed you. They're all the lipids of the factory of the cell. Here's the molecular side of the cell. You've got the nucleus and various different proteins inserted into the cell surface membrane. You've got the DNA in the nucleus, and you can see all these proteins, all these molecules interacting with each other in circles. And basically there's like loads of feedback loops. And this is simple. This is a signaling pathway in the cell. This is like tip of the iceberg stuff. If you actually showed what's happening in a cell, it would take up probably the wall in terms of the interactions that happen. So it's very complex. Yet we don't think about that. We just walk around and cells just sit there or swim around, whatever they do, and they don't think about the molecules. So how is it all working? It's miraculous, really. I wanted to go into DNA because it's been mentioned in this conference. I have a slightly different perspective than the classical reductionist approach, and I wanted to share that because it's not only myself. There are many eminent physiologists who are building speed. They've got a movement going, which is trying to help everyone to realise that DNA maybe it's not what we think it is. Because when I say DNA, what do you think? Anyone got any ideas? Blueprint, exactly, blueprint. Let's stop it there while I'm ahead. That's the word I was looking for. Okay, so DNA's got one role that I can see for sure. That is, it's a template library. That's what it is. So you have your DNA double helix molecule here. It unravels into single strands, and each single strand acts as a template to make RNA, which is a separate molecule, very similar to DNA. It's useful in its own right. So RNA can be used on its own, or it can be used as a template itself for protein, like enzymes and various things, the kind of main things that act in the cell. So this is called the central dogma of biology, and it's true. That definitely happens. Here's the leap, I think, as we've said a few times, the quantum leap. The DNA is the mastermind. Now, what is DNA? DNA is a molecule. There are many molecules in the cell. What gives us the reasoning to say that it is a mastermind, that it is a blueprint, that it causes the organism? And if you look very deeply, it's not so obvious the reasons why. What I propose, and I'll give you an example. When you have a single cell, you come from a single cell, we do, from the egg and the sperm fused. How is it that you don't look like a big blob now of just one cellness? You look like a specialized organism working automatically, liver, kidney, everything communicating together. How? Is it DNA which is causing that from the bottom up? Is it the big boss man? Well, actually, people are saying no nowadays. That's probably not what's happening. Potentially what it is that DNA isn't the mastermind, it's the master mediary. It's allowing the cell to replenish itself. And I'll give you an example. Erythrocytes have already been mentioned. Thank you for introducing me. Red blood cells, they don't have DNA. They don't have any DNA, yet they survive for a few days. Cells can survive without DNA for a few days, very happily. So what does that mean? Could it mean that DNA is serving the cell? It is a servant of the cell. Molecules are serving the cell. They're not the other way around. The molecules aren't causing the cell to happen or an organism to come about. I was going to show you this, but I don't think I can get it to work. I have to click on the link. Basically, it's showing DNA chromosomes being pulled apart when a cell divides, which is very interesting because if DNA is the kind of, the big boss, it doesn't really look like it. It's kind of, okay. It's on the Chrome browser. Let's move to the next one. Okay, you can't see this very well, sorry. But it's it seems like the main approach coming out of biology now, heavy reductionism is dead, I think is dead. The idea that DNA is the cause of everything. Systems biology is the way forward now, that's leading the way, we can all see that now. Organisms are systems, and what we've got here is the explanation. We've got molecules, cells, tissues, organs, organisms. Cells have purposes. Where these purposes come from, we have no idea. Biologists tend to say they emerge. Complexity or purpose emerges out of lower level interactions. And that's okay for the time being. Let's go with that. I don't necessarily agree from a kind of theological or a standpoint, but that's fine. So the cell, the molecules are tools of the cell. DNA is a tool of the cell. And Barbara McClintock, 1983, in a Nobel Prize, she said, way ahead of time actually, because this is only becoming popular now. She said DNA is an exquisitely sensitive organ of the cell. So it's not that it's causing the cell to function; it's acting in a way to help the cell to do what it wants to do. Tissues use cells to fulfill their function. Organs use tissues. The organism uses the organs and everything else to fulfill its purpose. But I think there's something missing here. I think what it is I put a little question mark up here, but you can't see it. If all these things, organs, tissues, cells, molecules, are tools of the organism, what is the organism a tool of? What is the organism being used by? What's the purpose of the organism? That question isn't answered here. And I think the real issue is consciousness. Because we don't, if consciousness emerges out of this system, it doesn't explain, as Martin has talked about previously, the hard problem, which is our experience of qualia. So what we're proposing in the Atma paradigm is that the Atma is the user of the organism. The whole point of an organism is for the Atma to use it. So let's just quickly look into what that could mean. I think virtual reality, I'm not saying the whole world's a virtual reality by the way, but it could be something like that. But it's offering a very nice way of, incredible analogy actually. This person, I think he thinks he's a bear or something. We can get very absorbed in these things to the point where you can look in the mirror and see yourself. Imagine it, it's flawless design virtual reality, and you want to be there. You love this life better than anything else, and you love this avatar, and you see yourself, that's me. Now, as I said, I'm not saying the world outside of us is all data. This is just the best picture I could find. We don't know what the world is. There's no way of finding out. What we do know is this is what we experience, and Martin has mentioned this term qualia, so we're experiencing qualia. The question I have is, can we express volition that will influence the kind of the world in which we live? Can we affect physical matter? Can we even affect our own physiology and the physiology of others, potentially? As Barbara Dunn said yesterday, we shouldn't get carried away in thinking we've got some kind of superpowers. I'm inclined to think that there are rules to the game, as in any game, and most of the time those who haven't got super elevated consciousness, there are very limited things they can do. Having said that, I do think there's a phenomenon that is ripe for investigation. And that is to do with group consciousness. Maybe individually we can't do much, we can't affect material systems too much, but as a group with co-aligned intentions, we call this co-intentional transformation. As we resonate together in a group with our intentions, maybe we can transform different things in the material world, perhaps even unbeknownst to us. And a good example of this group volition or co-intentional transformation is a recent study that I've spoken to a few of you about in bacteria. So bacteria, some of them have this flagellum. It helps them wiggle along, to swim around. And you can mutate a couple of genes and basically get rid of it. So basically what you're left with is this blob. So it's kind of stuck there, right? But they like to swim. So what happens when you add a little bit of antibiotic to the mix? They get stressed out. They get really stressed. And what happens if you get stressed? You want to get out of the situation. We might not have the capabilities to get out of the situation, but our deep intention is get me out of it. can that manifest, if there's enough of you thinking the same thing, in a transformation in physical matter? Well, what they found in this study from a couple of years ago, within 2 days, the bacteria in the culture, as they die off and new ones come up, they have flagella. They've grown back these flagella. So how did that happen? They analysed it, and they found that the bacteria hadn't used the same molecular pathway to grow flagella. They had mutated some other part of their energy metabolism, which is never used to grow these little flagella things, in order to adapt and grow flagella. Organisms are very flexible. There's huge buffering capacity. Genes aren't what we think they are, not just single things that cause an eye colour. There's a whole system thing going on in organisms. And my point is that this could be an example of how group intention can affect biology. So I've got a field of biology I'd like to propose to you, based on what Barbara Dunn's been talking about, and the results from PEAR, and what Martin's been saying. It's called remote biology. So, I'm not expecting everyone to jump off their seats and start, experimenting. But there are some very simple tests we can do in the lab, which anyone can do who grows bacteria, and just really simple stuff. My proposal is that we can do this thing which Tamara Bunny here is also part of the Science and Philosophy Initiative has been researching into, citizen science. The idea that we can tap into citizens, the public, in order to do science, and consciousness research really lends itself very well to that, because you've got a large group of conscious entities who have the capacity to change living systems. Here's an example of fluorescent bacteria. They're all bacteria on a plate growing, and each bacteria has a little colourful tag attached to its genes, so you've got lots of different colours. And one experimental idea I had is, if you have bacteria on a plate like this that have the gene for kind of fluorescing green, but there's a slight mutation in there, what would happen if you have enough people who are willing them to change to turn green? Would you be able to cause that mutation to switch back, and suddenly there's a lighting up to green, and you can actually measure that in the lab? So that's just a little flavour of the kind of things that we're interested in biology and the Atma paradigm. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. So we want just to extrapolate a little bit on those questions that Ryan asked. He suggested, well, if DNA is a servant of the cell, and the cell is basically something serving the tissues and the organs and the systems and the organism, what is the organism the servant of? And we're postulating, because we're coming at this from the point of view that already we've got consciousness existing. Remember that we are looking at this analysis from the viewpoint that consciousness is already there, because we know it can't be produced from matter. Therefore, we are confident in our approach. So we're able to look at the evidence that other people may be passing by with a new perspective. And that's what we are hoping we're going to excite many of you for as well. So, okay, if the organisms are a facility for consciousness comes first. Now, what does that mean for one of the biggest topics of biology, which is speciation? Let me give you this example. This is the tree of 40 fruits. It's at the University of Syracuse, of New York and Syracuse, and it was an artist, a gardener, who grafted 40 types of fruit trees. I think they're all stone producing, so there's cherries and apricots and almonds and all sorts of things. But why I like this as a metaphor is because you have one tree with its information sap flowing through its branches. But what is actually popping out at the end of the twigs are different fruits. And I think that's a metaphor for the tree of life that is generally presented to us in the evolutionary literature. Because this is one which actually looks like a tree. Most of them look, are all over the place. Now, it has to be understood that the tree of life has great problems. No one can agree on how it should be put together, because if you use certain physiological attributes, you'll get one tree. If you compare others, you'll get a different tree. If you start using DNA, then it's a question of which gene you're following, and you get different trees for each. And then there's horizontal gene transfer, there's convergent properties appearing when they're not related. It's a mess. Generally, it's accepted that the tree of life is utterly bogus. But it gives a flavour to what is being suggested. Now, I'm just borrowing this one, just to give you an example. And the other thing you've got to know about the tree of life is that the only thing that is there in physical terms on the tree of life are the fruits at the end of the twigs. There are no species ever identified anywhere along the branches. The branches of the tree of life diagram do not represent any particular species. Even the branching points do not represent species which branch off. They're always labelled as some ancestor of both types. So really the tree of life only are the fruits. That's all we have in species terms. So what are the branches? What is this trunk? What we're suggesting is that the trunk and branches represents the flow of tanmatric, subtle, proto-physical information. Information that is being moderated and affected by the psychology of the group intention mentioned by Ryan, converted into different branches of data, and producing at the end of its twigs, bang, new ancestor species. That is our postulation. Now, interestingly enough, this model fits the fossil record. The fossil record demonstrates that species appear in punctuated situations. Suddenly, a new ancestor type, different from all the others, appears fully formed, fully ready to go. No half-formed organs or anything. That's why we had the idea of punctuated equilibrium by Stephen Jay Gould. And it went through kind of